This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. Courts have committed to the advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in recruiting and selecting court employees. This commitment, however, has not been without some pushback. One criticism has been that personnel recruitment and selection should be entirely objective and merit-based. An evaluation format often cited as an example is the NFL Combine. The Combine measures prospective professional football players by a number of objective skills. How fast and how far can one run? How high can one jump? How much weight can one lift? How far and how accurately can one throw a football? How often can one catch a football and then run with it? And how effectively can one block another player? In addition, there are physical attributes that can be objectively measured. Height, weight, percentage of body fat, lung capacity, and previous injuries. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we're asking the question, can and should hiring criteria be objective? Are there measures that we can use to hire managers and supervisors that are devoid of personal or institutional bias? For this discussion, I picked a fairly typical manager's job announcement off of the NACM website. The announcement contains 20 different qualities. I chose 6 just to spark the conversation. A candidate should demonstrate knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies in the following: managing programs and staff by applying policies, procedures, and work standards, administering contracts and procurement, communicating effectively, orally and in writing, developing effective work teams and motivating individuals to meet goals and objectives, establishing and maintaining effective working relationships, and legislative analysis and advocacy. My co-host today is Stacy Werby, State Jury Coordinator for the Alaska Court System. Here to examine the question are Zanelle Brown, Executive Court Administrator for Michigan's Third Circuit Court in Detroit, TJ Bement, District Court Administrator for the 10th Judicial Administrative District in Athens, Georgia, Elizabeth Rambo, Trial Court Administrator for Lane County Circuit Court in Eugene, Oregon, and Stacy Fields, Court Administrator for the Municipal Court in Crestwood, Missouri. Thank you all for joining today's podcast, and I'll hand it over to Stacy with the questions.
When I was researching this subject, most articles I read focused on profits as an objective measure. This may be useful in the public sector setting, but may not be an appropriate measure for courts to use. Is there a methodology that can now be used to objectively evaluate and select job candidates for manager and supervisor positions? Zanelle?
So I don't have a methodology per se, Stacy, but I do think there's some things that we can do to incorporate in the process that'll help us be more objective. First of all, I'm assuming that the recruitment itself went to a diverse, wide group of candidates. And then after that, you want to make sure that you have a diverse group of people who are sitting on the interview panel. And before they start that interview process, that they know what are some key qualifications that they're looking for and what will be the key qualifications the ideal candidate possesses. And sometimes that could be, how long have you been in court administration? How long have you been a manager in court administration? You may also want to know what's some of the type of the challenges that that person has overcome. If you've done court administration, if you've never had a challenge, you had every resource available to you, you probably are not going to be a good fit for Wayne County's Third Circuit Court. So you sort of outline all of that before you get to the table. You have the objective criteria as best as you can, what you're looking for as far as experience. Hopefully During the screening process, things like names and addresses and past incomes were wiped out. So you're looking at each candidate, fairly almost like a blind interview, and the person is having the opportunity to come present things to you. So that's what I would suggest. I would also suggest that during the interview process, the scoring is done individually, not a groupthink type of session, and that there's conversation afterwards to debrief to see if somebody on the panel did have some blind spots or implicit biases at work.
TJ?
Thanks, Stacy. I'm actually going to take it back a step earlier than what Zanelle mentioned, just from my observation. So, when it comes to us doing that initial look for potential new folks that may come in as supervisors and managers, I would say we need to be doing better about making sure that we're casting a wider net. We generally rely on our HR offices to do the posting for us, and that's great. It's incredibly boring. It's incredibly dry. It says, here's all the job responsibilities and the qualifications and experiences and everything. There's nothing glamorous about being a manager in the court system, except what we do every day. So that doesn't get picked up. So making sure not only does that forward-facing piece from our HR allow us maybe to tell a little bit of the story, maybe to have a little bit of an intro that explains more, as Zanelle mentioned, sort of those bigger qualities that we're looking for that speak to more than just what the job description says on the HR posting, and to then make sure that we're pushing that out. I know a lot of us are suffering from a lack of qualified applicants, as expectations and what the job universe looks like right now. So making sure that we're pushing beyond those normal domains of just putting it on the county website or the county HR site, pushing it out to services like Indeed or LinkedIn, or using folks that work in the courts to push it out through their social media feeds that might then connect with somebody. But, sort of the usual things make sense of, it's easy to score and rate things like years of experience. Do you have this certain type of degree? How many years, check a box for the number of people supervised, a range of this or range of that. That's all great. And that's very blind and objective to help us look at some folks' comparison. But as Zanelle mentioned, one of the things that I think we still need to do better about is sort of blanking out the names of individuals. As I was doing work for this, I looked at that study. There was a study about 20 years ago by MIT and the University of Chicago, where they sent out resumes to Fortune 500 companies, and they used real resumes, but they changed the names of them. And they found that individuals that had Black sounding names, for example, got less callbacks than individuals that had white sounding names. Another group from the University of Chicago and the University of California, Berkeley, just redid that study and published it in 2021. And they sent out over 80,000 resumes. And it's not only just the same, but they say it's a little bit worse, that there's still that institutional bias against names. So what we can be doing on the HR front is making sure that our HR folks on the front end are looking at these applications blindly from names and maybe even institutions or colleges that may be considered historically Black or underserved, and just rating it for what it is. They got this thing, they have these numbers of years of experience, et cetera, to get as many people into the potential pool for us to consider as possible applicants.
And Liz.
The question is really, is there a methodology that we can use now to objectively rate candidates? And as they've described, the methodology we have now is overly simplistic. And it does not take into account the kinds of things we need to be looking at when we're attempting to achieve a more diverse workplace. So, for example, if we're looking at years of experience, or if our job profiles require certain years of experience, are there barriers to people getting those experiences that they've encountered before? And how do we take those things into consideration as we're looking at candidates in our rating system? So I would say right now, yes, there is a methodology that we use to be objective. Our job profiles describe what the years of experience and or education are for these particular positions. We use scoring methodologies and all of those things that were described to try to be more objective. But is it actually successful? Is it a methodology that we use? Yes. Is it successful in achieving that goals that we're trying to achieve? Not without the inclusion of more consideration by those people doing the hiring about what they're looking for, from what Zanelle and TJ both described as the posting, where you're trying to cast a wider net, on and down into looking at your own biases when you're doing those recruitments and trying to take that into consideration. So yes, there is one, needs work.
So Stacy, is there a methodology that can now be used to objectively evaluate and select job candidates?
I think that there is. And what I think on each of the points that each person has made, I think that we need to take it in a holistic context. If you just look at meeting a certain criteria, we're talking about the purposes and putting this under the umbrella, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that some of that weight needs to be taken on by those of us who have broken barriers, those of us who've had, more experiences. And I can speak just from being from Missouri. Literally, there are places in Missouri where there is not a population of minorities in this particular town. Now, does that mean that the selection process would be prejudicial going in to that type of environment? Well, that just is a reflection of a lack of experience, and a lack of a mix of cultures. And I think that if we look at it in a broader way, and I thought this was such an excellent example about the football, because I was like, why did we choose a football analogy? That seems so far because that's so physical. But it really made me begin to think about, we have to kind of look at the skill sets as being separate, what's trainable, what can be mentored in, but focus more on character, because it doesn't work to our advantage in hiring if we're just looking to make a space at the table for someone on the basis of fulfilling this diversity, equity and inclusion, if we're not selecting a good candidate. Because you can have a good candidate that may not fulfill those, but that may be the person that's the catalyst in bringing in that diversity. And we don't want to shut the door on that.
Liz mentioned that our current methodologies may be too simplistic. Is it possible to create such a methodology that would be more objective and merit-based? Stacy, we'll start with you this time.
Well, I think that we have to look at what the basis of this merit is. What's the context of the merit? And we can't forget, and I think something that you brought up in the very beginning about, we can't measure things according to, say, a type of retail environment, where something's profit driven. But we can't forget that we are serving people. We're serving people within our community. We're serving people, within our state. I'm a huge proponent for questions that really deal with character, how you interact, what you do, because on paper, you can be a stellar candidate on paper, but lack the ability to be able to carry it through. To lack the ability to be able to interact. If you have a particular population, you can't forget a particular population that you're serving. Generationally, it may make a big impact on how people perceive the courts are being fair, and courts are being just. So I think that, again, that we can use methodology as a tool, but that should not be the only indicator of what we use when we're hiring on staff.
Liz?
When we're building these leadership teams, we want them to be reflective of the diversity of our community or better, but we're also building leadership teams. And something Stacy said earlier really caught my attention about hiring people of high character. It's so true. I had an opportunity some years ago at a NACM conference to hear a keynote from a gentleman by the name of Bruce Weinstein. And he wrote a book called The Good Ones. And it was about the 10 core qualities of high character employees, things like honesty, courage, fairness, loyalty to the mission, patience, and all of those things that we would be looking for in our leadership team. And the thing is, those things are subjective questions. You ask people subjective questions to get at those qualities. So how do we build a merit system that's objective, that rates the answers to subjective questions and gets you the good ones as part of your leadership team? Because that's what we're really looking for. It would be lovely if we could do, what they've done for symphonies, where they just put a sheet down and you apply for your symphony part behind a sheet. But the reality is, when we're getting at those character qualities, we're looking at all of the verbal and nonverbal communication, and we're trying to figure out if these are the good ones that we're hiring. We're looking for the good ones. And so it is, I think, a mix of merit and objective things with all of those qualities that play into good leadership and good high character employees.
TJ, is it possible to create a methodology that may be more objective?
I think so, in the context of making sure that we are giving credit for the things that we want to see in the staff that we want to hire. So, Stacy and Liz noted, looking for those high character qualities. That's something that's not going to come out on a resume screening. It may not come out on some supplemental questions as part of that resume screening or application process. But the more folks that we can get through that we can then, have in the room with us and do an interview, I think that's where it lies on us as managers to have a good understanding of those skills and those soft skills that we're looking for, and to be mindful that not everyone is going to do well at an interview. It is a very nerve-wracking process. I can say I've given many more interviews than I have been the subject to, and that makes me more comfortable on the person asking the questions, but put me on the other side and I'll clam up. So looking for some good questions that have some good openings to allow folks to tell their story, to give that example, to talk about something maybe not as work related that goes to that skill set and that character that you really want them to get to. So, I don't know why we need to spend so much time with 5 questions in interview rehashing their previous employment when we've got it on their resume in front of us. Let's talk about what we want to see in the person that we want to have sitting next to us on our leadership team. So I think taking an opportunity to focus on that.
Do you think then that makes the probationary period more important?
From a personal perspective, yes, I think so. And I think Zanelle said that as well, that, the assessment does not end after the interview and after the offer of employment, that we need to look at those probationary periods, or that whatever you might call it in your organization may be something different, but really say we're investing in you and vice versa. And we want to make this work, and looking for opportunities to let them shine and to let those high quality, characteristics, come out in the work that they do.
Zanelle, do you think it's possible to create a more objective methodology?
I believe it is. I will echo what everyone said, TJ, Stacy, and Liz. And I would also add to that, we need to look on the interviewer as well. What do we need to change, or how do we best prepare that interviewer to be objective when they're in the process? Oftentimes, especially when we're including judges on our panels and things like that, they may not know that there's a tendency to view certain degrees certain ways. Basically, if you have a law degree, people believe it's currency for anything you want to do in the world, even though you may not have the skill set to do that. So having that, really honest conversation with the interviewers, what are we actually looking for? Why are we looking for that particular thing? And how do we correlate it to the success of the candidate? I think those are very important conversations. And I think we've all been hit by this thing called the fit. Oh, that's a very good fit. Well, what determines a fit? Or do you realize that you have a natural inclination to see people more favorably who look like you, or who have a background like yours, who went to schools that you had gone to or you wish you had gone to? And how do we move that all out of the way so we can make sure that we're finding the qualified candidate who can actually do the work. And then we can look in our institutions. How are we preparing people for these roles? And are we making sure that there's equal access and opportunity there as well?
If it is possible to create such a methodology, can your examples be used by courts to effectively select employees? So as an example, a methodology that does not involve so much candidate background checking as to become cost prohibitive. Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about the ways that we could incorporate the objective methodology into a process that is also looking for the qualities that we need in our leadership teams by all of the things we're doing now. And it's sort of a yes, and we're doing now, we're looking at the degrees, but is it just a degree? Maybe not. Maybe it's a degree and years of experience. Maybe it's a degree and years of certain kinds of experience, or maybe no degree, but years of certain kinds of experience. I mean, I think we have to be open, like TJ said, to creating more space in our requirements and maybe making them instead of requirements, desired attributes, those types of things, and looking at those objective things with the notion that they aren't everything. And I say this because we aren't a football team. We're not, seeing who can run the fastest down the field. We're looking for some artful qualities here. And I always think of recruitment as an objective, but it's really, when we in Oregon have tried to remove all the art from the process, it takes away the ability to really get at the qualities that we're looking for in people, those character qualities. And so I think you have to really blend them. So if we were to create such a methodology, absolutely we can use it. And absolutely we should be, to make sure that we are paying attention to diversity in every recruitment, and particularly in leadership recruitments. And that, as Zanelle mentioned, our interview panels are aware of the issues that confront them in interview situations and are considering diversity when they're listening to people's answers and responses. So yes, yes, and.
TJ?
I'm going to follow Liz here and say yes, and as well. So yes, I do think that we can create a more objective recruitment and hiring process. The and in that is that we need to be more proactive in that process. So if our HR offices are not doing that, then that's something that we need to institute ourselves once that pile of resumes gets to us. And it may be as simple as removing the name from the resume so that we don't have any inherent bias in how we read the name. Maybe having somebody remove the colleges and just put, did they get, have this degree or not have this degree? So that as best we can on that front end, we can level the playing field on the things that we're required to check off. If it's a required degree or if it's a required minimum years of experience, et cetera, the things that we can't work around, do those as objective as possible, but then gives ourselves the opportunity with some, application questions or something to get to the issues of somebody's character and integrity and the things that aren't going to show up on the, where did you work prior to this particular job, and making sure that we give opportunities there for that to come in the front end so that we can bring more folks into the interview process so that we can have that conversation and find that right fit.
Sanel?
It's mixing the art and the science together. I don't think you can have one without the inclusion of the other, and being aware that we need both of them, and then figuring out how does it best work in our organization, and being willing to commit and carry it through. Like TJ said, if our HR isn't doing it, where do we do it when the resumes get to us or when we're in the interviews? How do we ensure that that actually occurs? So I love the yes and response.
And Stacy?
Even addressing the component of the human resources portion of it. We can sometimes sit in a unique privileged spots of working with different people and have different partnerships in other areas, and letting people know, I have positions open, or if you see somebody else working in another particular maybe area, or you see, identify some attributes in people maybe you connect with, to just say, hey, I'm looking for, some candidates that are coming in, to kind of broaden that search, broaden those experiences, because a lot of things can be filtered through just on the basis of, okay, these are the skills that you have on paper. But having that connection of somebody who actually knows these people. From the experience that I had, I knew nothing of court. I didn't have that advantage. I didn't know anything other than there's a judge. That was it. But, becoming involved in that journey, I actually made connections and was part of different organizations. They helped me to grow and to make other connections, so that I, when opportunities came available, I knew about those opportunities. But kind of taking what my experience was and applying that, broader, how can I connect with some of our partnerships to find out people who may be up and coming, who are in leadership roles, that hey, they can make this transition easily. They've already been vetted to, a certain extent. Let's take a look at this candidate. So I think I like the ands on that, because I think that when we're having these kinds of conversations, it opens us up to be able to kind of look at a broader spectrum so that we can get really great kind of candidates.
So overall, what advice do you have for folks who are listening to this episode? Zanelle?
I want to say that when you're looking for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you got to look at your recruitment. Where are you casting your net? Are you casting it in a variety of places? Then when people respond to your invitation to apply for the job, how are you screening those invitations to get to the next stage? And is there some objectivity, more objectivity you can provide at that level? Then when you're inviting people in for the interview, are you trying to make sure that you're disrupting whatever implicit biases or institutional biases that exist there, so people are able to give answers and you're able to give some objective weight to them and also hear the stories? And then finally, once the job offer is extended, how are you continually to vet that person to make sure you did give it to the right person, you're getting the expected results? And if not, how do you make the changes so you can get to that candidate you should get?
Liz?
Challenge yourself. I'm constantly challenging myself to do better in areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I live in a community that is not particularly diverse. And so everything that the panelists have said about casting a wider net and looking for inclusion and diversity in your recruitments is critical for people like me. Making sure I'm getting out to the communities here in my town and getting those recruitments out, and then challenging my assumptions and the assumptions of our panelists on every step of the way. So I would say definitely question yourself, challenge yourself, and try to do better.
And TJ?
Thanks, Stacey. I'm going to sort of harken back to one of our own pieces of wisdom from NACM that's been around for a while. So in our court administrator guide to the profession, it says that we as, court professionals, when we're looking to do the recruitment process, need to hire folks that are competent, educated, professional, ethical, and committed. When you reflect on those, how do you see those on a resume? You might see that they've been working in the court for years. That might show a level of commitment, but that might not be who we're looking for. We may need somebody with a fresh perspective that's got the right skill set. So I think when we think about our roles as those that are doing the hiring process, as Liz and others have said, we've got that higher standard. We've got to have that higher standard on ourselves to say, we need to do what it takes. Is it throwing the HR system out on its head? I don't know, but maybe it's putting some of that burden on ourselves to making sure that we're trying to be as inclusive as possible in the hiring process, that we are looking for opportunities to look for the folks that bring in the right type of skill set, even if they may not have the right kind of degree or worked at the right kind of places prior to them coming to us. So I think we need to understand that higher standard is on us so that we can hire these right people that are competent, educated, professional, ethical, and committed. Because that's the people that we need working in our courts, because I think that's what the public expects.
And Stacy, what advice do you have?
The advice that I would have would be to remember your foundation. And what I mean by that is really, in essence, remember who you are. Remember who you are as a leader. Remember who you are and what you've come through. And let that be a foundation of who you're bringing in. Don't wait until you need a manager. Think about management material when you're hiring entry level. Think about management material that you're developing so that you're developing your management team. And if you do have to hire from outside, you want to, look at those things. And even if you're viewing their resume, look at those things that make them warriors. That's really no other way to put it. I worked at a smaller court that was actually the neighboring city to Ferguson. The crew that we had at that time, no one really was, everybody had some kind of, educational experience as far as college. We had someone who came in actually from teaching toddlers that was entry level. But through the circumstances that we endured and what we came through as a unit, we had to remember why we came to work every day. We had to remember who we were serving. We had to remember who we were when there were negative assessments that were cast upon us because we worked for the judiciary and because of where we were at that time. So each and every one of those people have gone on to either have their own court or they are supervisors at some other level. Looking at our resumes, you couldn't have told us that. We didn't know what was in us, but I think that we can't lose the value of building, from the beginning. Don't wait until you need a manager to look for a manager. Build that manager, make that SAM, that sponsor, that ally, that mentor. Be there, and then we can have different conversations because the people that we are bringing on board will continue the work that we're doing, bringing that diversity, that equity, and that inclusion.
As a postscript, I chose the NFL Combine as an example because on its face, it is a completely logical criticism of the effort to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the selection process. Who wouldn't want to use objective criteria to hire employees? The unspoken question in this discussion is, however, does the Combine work? Is the Combine an effective predictor of talent in the NFL? The results are decidedly mixed. Some players do test well and go on to successful professional careers. But the Combine cannot test every characteristic of a football player's potential success. It cannot, for example, test for compatibility with teammates or leadership, either on the field or as a role model in society. And the Combine can sometimes turn out to be a poor predictor. Case in point was a player in 2000 who was assessed as being too skinny and unathletic. He ran the second slowest time in the 40-yard dash. He ended up being the 199th player chosen, going in the 6th round of the NFL draft. That player's name? Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback in NFL history. I want to thank Zanelle Brown, TJ Bement, Elizabeth Rambo, and Stacy Fields for sharing their insights and observations about the challenge of using objective hiring criteria. This is not an easy question to address, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations on this topic in the months to come. Thanks also to my co-host, Stacy Werby, for her reflections and perceptive questions. As always, my thanks to you court professionals tuning in to today's episode. Employee selection is just one aspect of a professional's career. I know you approach all aspects of your work with competence and maturity. Thank you. Join us on Tuesday, January 17th, for another episode dealing with the issues facing our courts. This has been the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leader's Advantage is a regular podcast on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on YouTube, on Facebook, on iTunes, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is CLApodcast, that's all one word, @nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search through the entire episode to find it? The Additional Resources section of the webpage contains a question time marker sheet. Just find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can then quickly fast forward to that time in the episode and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.